today we're talking about something that's not talked about enough. We're talking about inclusivity. We're talking about diversity, both in life, in the workplace. We're going to be talking today about your superpower. Yes, the thing that you do better than anyone else, right? You can call it your unique ability. You can call it your gift. But today we're going to be talking about you, your abilities, your superpowers, diversity, inclusivity. We're going to be talking about how to adjust in today's world, all these different things. And to help me to do that, I brought a very special person onto the show, and a dear friend of mine. I've met this individual. His name is Kevin McShan. A couple weeks ago, actually, we're going to be doing a summit together later this month with another friend of ours, a couple friends of ours, Terry McDougall and Jacob Craig. And it's going to be all about success. It's called the Success Summit. And I was very happy when he agreed to come on the show to talk all about his work with his podcast and so on and so forth. So without further ado, for those who don't know Kevin McShan, Kevin lives with cerebral palsy. And rather than dwell on his personal restrictions, he says that the greatest gift he could ever give to the world is to celebrate his life and all of the life lessons that he's been put on earth to teach. He seeks to help others from all walks of life to share their story. Knowledge, information, and telling stories of inspiration and courage is what truly drives Kevin as a podcaster and in life. And Kevin, it is a pleasure to have you here, my friend. Thanks for making the time.
Brandon, I'm delighted to be with you, and I'm excited for a fruitful and productive hour. Great to be with you this morning, and thanks for the invitation, buddy.
Right back at you, my friend. Thanks for being here. I know you're a busy guy. When I say busy guy, guys, listen, Kevin is executing more than 99% of the people that I talk to on a daily basis. And I'm talking to salespeople, entrepreneurs, business owners. Kevin is getting things done with his podcast, with his social media, with his LinkedIn. He's meeting a bunch of awesome people, making great connections. But the one thing that I commend you for, Kevin, and then I promise we'll get to you, the one thing I commend you for is your dedication to your mission. So to start this off, let's let everyone else know, what is your mission and what do you believe you were put on earth here to do?
Well, my professional mission, Brandon, and thanks again for having me, is within 5 years, I want to host a national talk show, but my overall life mission is building bridges of inclusion to include everyone in our societal discourse and discussion, because it's my belief that everyone has a story in which to share, and any way that I can give platforms to promote inclusion, acceptance, and diversity, that's what I'm all about, buddy.
That's great. That's awesome. And whenever I hear someone with a mission and a story like yours, I always wonder, who was this person growing up, right? So tell me a little bit about your childhood. Tell me a little bit about who was young Kevin, and just tell me a bit about your upbringing and really what led you here.
Yeah, no problem. So for your viewers and for people that don't know, I was born with what's called spastic quadriplegia cerebral palsy. That's the form of cerebral palsy that I have. It simply means that I don't have enough oxygen in my legs to walk normally. Whenever someone asks me about my upbringing, I always bring them back to my second to last year of elementary school. It was 1998, and I had just come back from Thames Valley Children's Hospital in London, where all of my surgeries and operations happened for my disability. And I remember Dr. Tim Carey, who was the doctor who performed all of the surgeries and procedures on me, had brought my parents into a room and had told them that I would probably never be able to walk normally in my life, and that the surgery that I had just encountered or endured was my last one, and there wasn't anything from a medical perspective that they hadn't tried that they were willing to try again. So I was faced with the reality of not being able to walk, and I had to go back to school. And when I went back to school, the principal at the time, her name was Carol Crawley. She had called me into her office, and she had realized that I was struggling to accept the fact that I had never would be able to never walk normally as someone and chase my dreams of being able to be a quote unquote normal member of society. I've got a totally different perspective on that now, but at the time, she had called me into her office because she had realized that I was struggling to come to terms. And then she had told me that I would have the same access to opportunity that anyone would have. My journey or road of success would only be limited by the scope of my imagination, and that I would be able to accomplish anything as long as I found a more efficient way to do it. And I really think that was the turning point in my acceptance, dealing with my disability and forming anyway the life principles that I live by today.
Who was that again that told you that you could be and do whatever it is you wanted to do, even with these life circumstances?
Yeah, it was my elementary school principal at the time. Her name was Carol Crawley. I really credit her for really steering me on the pathway of life in which I live by today. And you know, Brandon, I shared with this with you before, but I live my life through a simple saying that inclusion is the gateway to independence, because when you include people, you provide them a sense of security, independence in both society, financially, and you allow them to explore what it is that makes them the person they are. So that's sort of an insight of how I live my life and the principles in which I live by.
Now, and by the way, it's incredible that you had someone in your life who gave you that message, because I mean, we can't hear that message enough, right? Every person, whether they're living with a disability or they have learning, they're not able to learn the same way as other people, right? They're put into special ed classes, and it's not that they are learning disabled, it's that they simply learn and do things in a different way. And we can't, it's great that you had someone in your life like that. By the way, have you had her on your show, or have you been in touch with her?
You know, I haven't seen her since my grade 8 graduation, but I'd love to find her and thank her for the impact that she had on my life. She spent nearly 40 years in education before she retired, and I'm sure she mentored a lot of people along the way. So
yeah, and now you took that torch, and now you're doing the same thing. So I have a personal question for you, just because I'm curious. I grew up with full ability, right? I grew up a very privileged lifestyle, and I still live a very privileged lifestyle. So I can't imagine the emotions that must have come across you when you were first told by the doctor that you wouldn't walk the same way that other people do. What did you feel in that moment when you were told those? That I know you were young, but what were the emotions that you experienced when you were given that news?
Yeah, I think I was 8 or 9 years old, and at the time, you know, I had visions of getting over my disability and becoming a football star, because I love football and I love sports. And when that didn't happen for me, you know, it took a little while for me to accept that and to sort of change the course of which I was going to have to live my life. You know, I always tell people I make my circumstances work for me, and I don't work for my circumstances. I think when you put the mindset in place to be successful, I think you're destined to accomplish that goal. But when I was younger, certainly, I just found different ways to experience my own a level of prosperity. You know, I also tell people that everyone's portrait of success is different, and certainly my way of painting a success picture will be different than yours or your viewers. It's just, I never want to subject myself to artificial expectations or expectations of others. Now, that's not to say that I don't have role models or people that I aspire to be like. It's just to say that I just want to have my own standard of expectation, because if you set your own standard of expectation, you can set your own timetable as well. So I think that's really important for people that are dealing with the expectation or the pressure of living up to be a certain way, or certain demographic of the population wants them to be a certain way. It's always important to set your own standard of excellence and success, and it's gotten me this far, so I don't plan on changing my philosophy in that regard, buddy.
Absolutely. Yeah, you're making amazing progress, and that's a beautiful message, and I agree with you. And I know that there are young Kevins who are listening to the show right now, and they're thinking to themselves, yeah, you know, I've been told those things before too. I also believe that, but it's easier said than done, Kevin. How can I implement that in my own life right now? So my question for you is, now that you were given this message by your elementary school principal, right? And you're going through middle school, you're going through high school. What did that journey look like for you, continuing in the education system around other people who just, quite frankly, don't understand what you were going through? They don't understand your situation. They're ignorant to it. They're not educated about it. What was that experience like, and what challenges did you face going through that time, and how did you overcome it?
Well, I think for high school and for anyone with a disability, social isolation is a big thing, and it's something that to this day that I still work to overcome. Now, I've gotten a lot better, but I think at the time, you see everybody else doing high school normal things, and you have to sort of find your own way of doing it. Now, I will tell you that my nickname in high school was K-Money, because everybody thought I had a whole bunch of money because I had the answers to everything. Wow. But, you know, high school for me was an interesting experience because it really allowed me to grow as a person. You know, when you go down the hallway in an electric wheelchair, and you're the only guy in the class with the electric wheelchair and the extra educational assistant down the hallway, you're hard to miss. So I think another huge influence in my life in terms of high school anyway was Margie Herseg. She was my learning support teacher, and she was always someone that I went to for resources and advice, and always encouraging me to chase the possible and believe in the potential of my productivity. And I think that also led me to believe that anything is attainable as long as you set out a path to be successful. So I think high school for me was an interesting social experiment because it allowed me to experience the social experience sort of differently than everybody else because of the circumstances that I was put in. Again, I made my circumstances work for me, and I tried not to work for my circumstances. And it's still a philosophy in life that I live by today.
Who were some of your, because you're extremely well spoken, and I know you mentioned your superpowers communication, which I want to get to, but just not yet. I mean, you have a vast vocabulary. You are very well spoken. Like and not envy. Envy is probably not the right word, but I'll say it anyway. I envy your ability to communicate and your ability to take a message and make it simple and yet have it still have that profound impact. Who did you have in your life when you were younger, or was it after you've graduated and grew into adulthood? Who were your inspirations and motivations, and who were really your teachers during that time and even up till today?
Well, I have to start with my family. You know, I have amazing parents and grandparents who have always told me to never allow my disability to determine the path that my life will be charted on. So I have to start with my parents. I have an identical twin brother who has had amazing impact in my life. So I have to say thank you to Keith. Keith and I were actually both born with cerebral palsy. Keith grew out of his as a child. It still affects things like his handwriting, but other than that, Keith grew out of his CP. If you're looking for personal and professional role models, I'm really close friends with the radio voice of the Detroit Lions. So Dan had a profound, his name's Dan Miller, so he's had a profound impact on my life, certainly as a broadcaster. When you talk about college influences, I think of two people instantly. The first, her name's Veronique Mandel, and she's the coordinating professor of our journalism program at St. Clair College here in Windsor. And Veronique has always encouraged me to follow my journalistic dreams and sort of break down barriers of inclusion in the journalism field, which I'm sure we'll get into later. But she's always encouraged me to break down diversity and inclusion barriers in the field of journalism. The other mentor, I guess, in college was a guy named Ryan Peebles. Ryan serves now as the student representative council general manager for St. Clair College. And at the time, he was my student council representative lead. Anything that I needed, I went to Ryan, you know. The journalism program at the time was in the basement of an old convention center, and all of the classes were in the basement at at downtown campus here in Windsor at St. Clair College. And Ryan's office was directly across the hall from my locker. And anybody who has had a disability and has had to rely on public transportation will appreciate this story. You know, Ryan I always called him Motel 6 because anything I needed, I went to Ryan's office, and I thanked him profusely, and I still do to this day for always keeping the light on for me. Because, you know, when a class was over early and everybody else had the chance to go home, I had to stick around and wait for the transportation because it was a certain time, and sometimes they couldn't pick me up early. So I would always hang out in Ryan's office, and he would always check in on me and see if I needed anything, if he could make my college experience a little bit better. So if I had to think two people in particular for my college ascendance, I guess, as it would be Veronique and Ryan. So that's my story.
And that's great. It sounds like you've had a lot of inspirations. It sounds more so like you've had a lot of friends and people and positive influences around you that have helped you to mold into who you are today. And I talk, and the reason I ask that is I talk all the time about we are the three people that we spend the most time around, right? If we're spending time around people who support us and want to help us grow, then that's what will happen, right? If we're around people who charge our energy and charge our batteries, then that's how we're going to feel. We're the average in emotions, we're the average in income, we're the average in practically everything. So it's amazing how you were able to get yourself around like-minded people and people who charged your battery. At what point would you say you decided that your mission would be to share and to spread positivity around inclusivity and diversity and helping other people who've gone through what you've gone through and have overcome the challenges you've overcome? At what point did you realize this mission of yours and start acting?
Well, I'll tell you, Brandon, the reason I became a journalist was I wanted to either be a journalist or a judge, and I found that the law school was a lot longer than journalism school, so journalism school won. But in all seriousness, I've always communicated, and I've also lived my life by life is a constant game of connection, and I've always wanted to connect the dots of opportunity. And for me, since I couldn't do it from an athletic standpoint, I wanted to be a sports reporter. And then I found out that being a sports reporter, while ambitious and attainable, everybody wants to be the next greatest thing on ESPN, right? If you get into sports journalism, everybody wants to be the greatest at everything. So I had to figure out, I will tell you that I didn't get my first paying job out of college until 6 years after I graduated. So I had to pivot because the journalism aspects that I was pursuing, while great in terms of building a volunteer resume, didn't get me a chance to make money. So I had a chance to, in 2016, and I want to thank the folks over at Assisted Living Southwestern Ontario for giving me this opportunity at the time. They gave me an opportunity to work on a project called the We Are Able Project. The project at the time was intended to educate employers about the positive benefits of hiring people with disabilities. The project lasted 13 months. We got a total of 28 people hired through the initiative. We gave 30 presentations throughout the Windsor Essex region about the positive benefits of hiring people with disabilities. From there, I had a chance to go to Queen's Park, which is our provincial or state government over here in Canada. So I had a chance to go to Toronto to lobby the Ontario government to hire more people with disabilities, and through the press conference that I participated in, the province appointed a special advisor to look into that. And out of that special advisor came something called the Discoverability Network, which is the Ontario province of Ontario's new online job matching portal for people with disabilities and employers to get connected. Windsor was the first region in our province that the initiative started. I was the regional ambassador for the first 18 months of the project. We got a total of 70 individuals employed during my tenure as ambassador. They either got an employment opportunity or an internship opportunity. We also connected the network with 15 total new employers during the time that I was ambassador. And from there, I served 9 months as the job developer at the YMCA here in Windsor and Essex County. So that's sort of the overview of my employment or inclusive employment history. I'm certainly proud of the work that we've done, but the work still continues. But to answer your original question, I think that advocating for inclusive employment and inclusivity in general has been a lifelong mission, because it's something that I've lived, right? having to wait 6 years out of college for my first paying job. So as I told you at the beginning, if you give people with disabilities a job, you open up the floodgates to independence. And it's sort of been a lifelong passion project of mine, and I hope it's made an impactful difference anyway. So.
Yeah, incredibly said. How old are you, by the way, Kevin?
You want to guess before I tell you?
I'm going to guess. I was thinking, I'm going to say you are 28 years old.
Well, I should get your address to send you a bouquet of flowers there, buddy. No, I'm actually 32, buddy.
Okay, so pretty close. The reason I ask is because you've accomplished and have done so many things in your young career and in your life so far. It's incredible to hear about the difference that you're making in this environment of inclusivity. And my question for you, just to jump right into this, because I think this should be the main talking point of our conversation. What is the main obstacle I should ask this way. What's the main reason that companies and businesses aren't hiring those with disabilities, and what is the struggle when it comes to the inclusivity at these different businesses and companies? What's the main reasons?
Well, since you're in America, I'll give you some American statistics. 12.6% of our population who have a disability were unemployed in 2020. And I think one of the reasons that is that we have to create bridges of opportunity. It's one thing to put on the end of a job application that you're an equal opportunity employer, but without action steps, it's just words on a piece of paper. And I think the biggest thing that the disability community has to be able and willing to do is advocate for themselves. And what I mean by that is there has to be an increase in education on the positive benefits of hiring people with disabilities. One of the reasons that the Ontario Chamber of Commerce decided to start the Discoverability Network was that they did a survey before the network started, and it found that 77% of small and medium-sized businesses were willing to hire people with disabilities, but they weren't having luck in finding them. So the network was created in part for that reason. So I think creating more opportunities for access to these jobs for people with disabilities, increasing the education about the positive benefits of hiring people with disabilities, and also embracing it as a culture within an organization is very important. I always tell people that we make time for the priorities that are important to us. So if business people are wanting to do that, I think the first step is to create tangible action steps and working with the service providers for people with disabilities who are working to get them employed. There are agencies within every community that are charged with hiring people or working with people with disabilities to get them hired. People with disabilities have a different perspective on how to look at life and how to solve problems. And I always told employers that if you hire someone with a disability, you've instantly gained a competitive edge over your competition, right? Because you can offer a different perspective or a different way of providing services because you have a diversified workforce. So I think it starts with a commitment to diversifying your workforce, putting forward tangible action steps, and also increasing the education of employers on how to streamline the process of hiring someone with a disability.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many things that we could be doing, and you're paving the path for that to be a reality. And let me tell you, I was recently doing my trainings for the company that I work with, and every year we do the annual compliance trainings, right? About 5% of all of that training had to do with discrimination, inclusivity, and diversity. Maybe 5%, maybe 5 minutes of all of the training that was done. The rest of it was on gender roles. The rest of it was on sexual harassment, all very important things to be educated on. But being educated on our own unique strengths, being educated on the fact that we're all different, whether we have a disability or not. I worked with a blind woman yesterday, and she was different in what you just said, in the sense of she has a different perspective on things. I was asking her about her life. I was asking her about challenges she's gone through. But when we're younger, and I think that this is something that stems from when we're very young, we see people who are in a wheelchair. We see people who learn differently and struggle as a result. And we think things in our head like, oh, they're just different than me, right? Or they are lesser than me. So obviously there's this stigma that has grown through our childhood, and it continues in our culture, that I believe is a big reason for this. Even when I've seen people who come in for a job interview when I was in leadership who would get turned down, and I'd ask, well, why'd they get turned down? And they didn't come out and say, oh, well, it's because they're disabled, but they would say things along the lines of, I can't see them performing the duties that we are responsible for performing, right? So this is obviously a problem, a big problem that's not talked about enough as much as it should be talked about. And the question then comes to, well, how can we bring about this education? But my question to you is, there's a lot of companies right now who are desperately looking for people, desperately looking for workers. And like you mentioned, a lot of them say they want to hire more people with disabilities because some companies see the value in that, right? Hopefully more in time. How can those companies find more people with disabilities who'd be a perfect fit for the role that they're looking for?
Well, first of all, like I said, it starts with embracing the culture and coming up with a game plan within an organization to do that. Now, once you're committed to that process, it's all about obtaining the resources to be successful. So again, that's hosting disability-specific job fairs. It may be working with community organizations who are charged with finding employment for people with disabilities, having targeted messaging or marketing towards people with disabilities. We also did a study at the Ontario Chamber of Commerce when I worked there, and it found that 80% of accommodations for folks with disabilities cost less than $500 and can be as simple as the raised height of a desk, the use of assisted software, or specialized headphones or headsets. So it's all about embracing that as a culture or an expectation within your organization, and then getting the resources in place to accomplish that goal. Again, it's all about creating community resources, working with people within the community, and also looking at your job descriptions and how you're marketing a job. When you say on a job description, people with disabilities are encouraged to apply. But then as an employer, are you putting together the environment to be successful? If you say that you want to hire someone with a disability and they have transportation challenges, are you going to allow them to embrace technology? A lot of people will be working from home as a result of the pandemic because they have seen that you don't always have to be in an office setting to be successful. But when people do go back to work, how are they going to retrofit, for lack of a better term, their workspaces to include people with disabilities? And another thing that I think is important is also creating avenues for opportunities for leadership for people with disabilities. If you put them in a leadership position, then it's a net positive for your organization because it allows them to also break down these barriers and eliminate barriers towards inclusion. So to answer your question in a more broad sense, it's about creating a sense of culture. It's also creating a sense of community resources, working with local and federal and state governments to put together legislations and policies, strengthening the Americans with Disabilities Act, putting together jobs that can be altered to better suit people with disabilities, and also embracing technology as well. So I hope that answers your question. I know it was a roundabout way of answering your question, but I'm passionate about this stuff, and there's a lot to dive into, but I hope that gives you a sense of a starting point anyway.
Yes. Yeah, no, it answers it beautifully, and I think there's so much we could dive into this realm. And I just want to ask a very point-blank question, which is, what are companies and corporations missing out on by not incorporating this education or these programs or these initiatives in their business to hire more people with disabilities? What are they missing out on?
Well, first and foremost, I think when you hire someone with a disability, your training costs go down because they want to prove they can do the job. So your training cost goes down. You're missing out on a chance to increase morale and productivity within your workforce. And also, you're missing out on a chance to diversify your workforce. You know, the slogan for the Discoverability Network is to seize the opportunity to advance your business. So I think anyone that embraces hiring someone with a disability instantly has a chance to advance their business because they have a different way of solving problems or coming up with solutions towards innovation as well.
You know, I never actually thought about it that way of, you know, when you hire someone who with a disability, they will be more inspired to do well because now they're in the job that they want to be in, and they'll be happy and they'll be proud that they got the opportunity and the productivity. And like you said, the morale, because now everyone is getting that different perspective. And let me tell you from personal experience, I've had conversations with one person in particular that I'm thinking of, and they've applied to many different businesses, right? They're wheelchair bound, and they've been told no over and over and over again. And I'm sure a lot of it has to do with discrimination. It's just the reality. They won't be told that, but that's just the reality, right? What would you recommend to somebody with a disability who's been saying, oh, I can't get hired to do the jobs that I want because I'm discriminated against, I'm missing out on opportunities? What advice would you give somebody in that situation to find somewhere that they love working for and actually securing that job and employment?
Well, thanks for the question. And I will tell you, for me personally, I personally haven't worked in a year and a half. So I can understand this, and I have personal experience. Well, first thing I would say is embrace the fact that you're different and find a way to elevate your disability to a strength. And what I mean by that is find a, you know, one of the reasons I started the podcast, my own podcast, was I wanted a chance to cover more than sports because I was trained as a sports reporter, and I was interested in a whole bunch of different topics, and I wanted to showcase my journalism diversification. I'll tell you this story. I was actually supposed to go back to the Discoverability Network a month before COVID hit, and then I was about to finalize my contract to go back to the network, and then my contract got suspended, so I started the podcast. And allowed why it sucked that I wasn't going to be working again and in a place where I had success, then I had the opportunity to pivot. So I want everyone out there with a disability to always embrace the pivot. And what I mean by that is find what makes you successful as a person and find a way to monetize that, right? Whether you have to become your own entrepreneur or alter your resume or make connections, whether it's a volunteer connection. Never shy away from making the connections that make you successful in life. So that would be my advice.
Well said. I think that that's incredible advice for everybody, but especially people who've gone through what you're currently going through at this time. You know, are you currently looking for employment, Kevin, in a specific field, or are you focused on your podcast and reaching your goal to be a national broadcaster?
Anybody who wants to write me a paycheck, I don't turn them away, right? So, to be honest with you, if I can find a job in journalism and communications, obviously that would be my preference. But I've also, of course, done work in employment and community building. So I'd be open to any and all opportunities. And it's something that I'm constantly, I'll tell you this. Every time I put out a new podcast, it's my way of expanding my resume, right? Mm-hmm. Because of sometimes of the disability, and I shared this with you on my own podcast. I use my podcast as also a way for social inclusion. Because of my disability, I don't necessarily get to travel as much as everyone else. So I use the 30 or 40 minutes I spend with people as a way of a social outlet, and also the guests who really like me, I go back to them and say, I'm applying for this job. Would you mind serving as a reference for me? So I think every opportunity opens you up to an opportunity for advancement. And I've always tried to use the podcast as a way of advancing as a journalist and also showing people that you can create your own platforms in order to advance.
I respect the hell out of that for a couple reasons, and I'm really happy you said it. You are literally showcasing your ability to the world, right? You're showcasing your ability, you're building your resume while having conversations with a bunch of interesting people that you are connecting with and meeting and being invited to other opportunities like this Success Summit. You are just building this mountain of credibility and expertise and authority for yourself, to the point where when the right opportunity does come along, because you weren't sitting still and standing still, you instead, people will look at this mountain of content and positivity that you've created and put out into the world, and they're going to say, this person's the perfect individual for the job, disability or with no disability. And I talk a lot about doubling down on your strengths, right? And I talk a lot about your unique abilities, your superpower, and what you just said of use your disability as a strength, right? What about this causes you to have different advantages even over people who don't have it, right? And I feel that a lot of people might listen to you say that, Kevin, and they might say, well, you know, that's easier said than done, right? I don't know what my strengths are. I don't know what I'm specially skilled at. You told me that your superpower is communication. You mentioned that to me in our interview together. What would you recommend to people who say to you, I'm not sure what my superpower is. How do I find it?
First of all, I think every opportunity for growth is a net positive, right? I think every opportunity to be successful is a net positive, and we all have to embrace what makes us unique, as you said, because it's our superpower. But for those that don't know what their superpower is, my next question is, what are you interested in? What gets you excited to get out of bed, and how can you turn that into employment potential. So if you don't know what your superpower is, the first thing you have to determine is what is your net positive in life? How do you want to advance forward? And once you answer that question, then your net positive will become easy to determine.
Was it reflection that helped you to find your superpower and your mission? Was it a series of events? How long, like, what was it? Was it a catalyst? Was it over a period of time? How did you discover it yourself?
Well, I think for me, Brandon, my parents have always told me I love to talk. So they told me if I'm not willing to shut up, to use it as a way to advance myself, and I've tried to take that message to heart. But in all seriousness, communication for me is a chance to have conversations for advancement, whether I'm helping other people advance forward through the messages that I have delivered through my podcasting, through motivational speaking, or just through my own life experience. I think communication for me is an outlet to the rest of the world, and I don't want to suppress the opportunity to be successfully advanced. So I think communication for me has always been a lifelong passion and commitment. Now it's taken on many different forms. It doesn't necessarily always have to be in a journalism sense, but as I shared with you last week when we did my own podcast, I think for me, every chance that I wake up to have the chance to have engaging conversations, I grow not only personally, but I also grow professionally as well.
Well said. Absolutely. And I like how you said that your specialty or your superpower will take many different forms. Because for those listening who are still like, I'm not sure what that is for me. I mean, what have your parents told you that you do a lot, or that you're good at, or that you always do without you even consciously realizing you're doing it? What are the things that your friends tell you you're good at? When you ask your friend even, hey, what do you like about me? Their answer is probably a really good indication of what your superpower actually is. But like you just said, that can take a lot of different forms. For you, it's journalism, it's broadcasting, it's through your podcast now. For me, it was, I was training salespeople in person. I was training them virtually. And I said, well, I want to use this skill to broadcast to people everywhere, which is what inspired the Be Better broadcast and my YouTube channel and my workshops. So your specialty and your skill will take many different forms, but it's about pinpointing what is your advantage, disability or no disability. What is it about you that makes you special? And how will you use that? So speaking of that, I want to branch off now to talk about your podcast. Let's have this conversation. How long ago did you start Let's Have This Conversation?
I started Let's Have This Conversation in May of 2020, right after I found out my contract was suspended, and we were in lockdown. And I told myself that there was only so much Netflix we could watch, right? And I wanted a way to, once the world opened up again, to advance my career and also keep my resume current. So I started the podcast as a way to, again, have a social interaction, demonstrate journalism diversification, and to hopefully give people an outlet and some education on the news cycle and putting together a platform to allow people to share their stories, whether it be business, lifestyle, sports, politics, or the regular news cycle. I wanted a chance to engage people in conversation. Since the podcast started, we now have over 250,000 lifetime views, just over 3,500 subscribers. And as of the end of this week, we'll be at 300 episodes. So We're celebrating a little bit of a milestone on the podcast. And keeping my parents' vernacular alive that I love to talk. So there you go.
Yep, absolutely. Wow. Absolutely incredible that you started this podcast in May of last year during a time where a lot of people said, oh, there's no opportunity right now, right? You just said, but I wanted to keep my resume and my vernacular current. And you're almost up to 300 episodes, reaching 3,500 people consistently, but 250,000 lifetime views. I can't even imagine 250,000 people in a room. Think about 300 people in a room. Right. So the amount of people you've been able to reach in just over a year is spectacular. And it just shows the power of aligning with what your strengths are, having a vision, having a mission, and taking action on it. And I think it's really important, Kevin. All these things that you mentioned are important. I think the most important thing is what you show by your example and not even what you've said. You wake up every day and you do things. You take action. You have these conversations. Kevin, would I be correct in saying that before some conversations, you're uncomfortable? Are you uncomfortable before certain conversations or events that you're about to have during your day?
Well, yeah, I'll give you an example. I interviewed a dating coach last week, and I'm a confident. Like I can go into a room of people and deliver a message, no problem. But one of the things that I'm constantly working on is eye contact with people in a smaller setting, because when you're in a smaller setting, it's more authentic and intimate, and it's just you and the other person. So I had my notebook out last week, both mentally and physically, and I took some notes because, a dating coach also can provide you some social advantages in terms of how to build social relationships, how to talk to people. So all throughout all of my conversations, I grow because it's a chance to both expand your mind as a journalist, but also expand your mind as a person, because everyone has a different life perspective. And, one of the things that one of the mottos that I live my life by is the moment you close your mind off to learning is the moment you die. So I always encourage learning and always encourage knowledge building, because I believe that you can disagree with a person's beliefs, but if you can respect their opinion, you can grow as a person.
That is amazing. I'm actually writing down that quote right now. The moment you close your mind off to learning is the moment you die.
Yeah, absolutely. It's something that I live my life by. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a powerful little tagline right there with a lot of meaning. And the point of me asking you that question is to say you have a mission and you're doing things every single day. You're executing on that mission, even during times when you are uncomfortable, having difficult conversations, trying new things. You are still going out there and doing things. And I think no matter who's listening, job, no job, disability, no disability, learning disorder, no learning disorder, you have an opportunity today to do something to move you in the direction of closing that gap, whatever that gap might be, or starting something new, or even reflecting and not physically doing, but mentally doing some thought on what is my mission, what is my vision, what is my strength that might even be brought about from this disability. And my question to you, one of my closing questions, actually, before I ask where we can find you, Kevin, is how can we, everyone listening, all of us, help promote inclusivity for all in the workplace and outside the workplace?
Well, the first thing I'd tell you that would be, don't be afraid to start the conversation of asking your employer or asking the people you know empower, what are you doing to advance your business or promote a diversified workforce? what is the inclusion or equal opportunity policy within an organization? How can it be altered to infuse people with disabilities? What community resources are available? These are all questions people can be asking, but the first question, if you're not in a position of power, is how can I start a conversation to make a difference? Do I know someone in leadership that can benefit from hiring a person X who has a disability? How can they inspire a business to make the systemic changes necessary to promote inclusion? So I think it all starts again by having a conversation. So I would simply say in closing, don't be afraid to start the conversation, because you never know where it will lead you, right? So
let's have this conversation. Absolutely. So where can we find you after today, Kevin?
Yeah, to tell you, we just released a website for the podcast, so you can find me at kevinmcshan.com. You can also find me most readily on YouTube. Just type in "Let's Have This Conversation" and then my name afterwards, and you can find my stuff. I also have a personal YouTube channel, just Kevin McShan, and you can find me. I'm most active on LinkedIn, so those are the places you can find me. My Twitter handle is McShan8150, and my Instagram handle is 81509, and it's just my name. So those are the most active and most relevant places you can find me.
Excellent. Everyone, I'm going to have links in the description where you can go find Kevin. You can find his podcast, Let's Have This Conversation, and truly dive into his content. So, Kevin, thank you for your time today, for being on the show. Thanks for having me on your show. And it was great having this conversation, and I look forward to the many conversations that we have in the future here.
Brandon, it was delightful to be with you. I want to thank you again for the opportunity to engage in conversation. It's always great to see you, and continued success, my friend.
Thank you so much, Kevin. Another incredible conversation. This one all about diversity, inclusivity, and really love, right? Loving one another for the differences that do make us unique. Right? We all have this superpower and this strength that we can capitalize on. And like Kevin says, take your disability and monetize on that. Right? And the number one way that all of us can help, disability or not, is by starting the conversation and not being afraid to start the conversation. And I think that it is a fearful thing, bringing that up in the workplace, right? Especially if you don't currently work in a culture of exclusivity or inclusivity. We probably are working in a culture of exclusivity, many of us in the workplace. I know that companies that I've worked for in the past have, some were better than others, but start the conversation and bring in some people with new perspectives, right? For companies and businesses watching, bringing in those with disabilities and those who learn differently, they're going to have lower training costs because they're going to be more inspired to do the work. They're going to be more inspired to prove themselves. It's going to improve productivity. It's going to improve morale. Bringing in people who are different than who we are give us different vantage points, right? And this is why I say the same thing about finding friends who are different than you. Make sure they charge your battery still, but being different is a beautiful thing, right? Because you are different. You have something unique about you. You have a superpower that you can and should monetize because you have that superpower for a reason. So again, the links to find Kevin are in the description of this video. Go check out those links, visit his website, go listen to his podcast. Let's Have This Conversation. I was on the show, and he also has a ton of incredible people you can listen to, almost at 300 episodes. The number one way that you can support the Be Better broadcast, we don't run ads, we don't do any sponsors, nothing like that. The number one way is to share this show with one person who could use this message. So literally hit the share button, send this in a text message or an email or whatever suits your fancy, and send this to a friend who also needs to hear or wants to hear this message today. Thank you so much for tuning in. And until we talk again next time, continue to be better.